Thanks everyone for joining. Glad we could tear you away from the cookies, if there are any left, for joining this lunchtime session. Final session today here in the Elliott Room. We are going to have a presentation about the proliferation of deepfakes. They've obviously led to all manner of real-world harms over the past few years as technology has become much more sophisticated with respect to impersonating individuals, impersonating organizations. We've seen fraud, we've seen abuse, we've seen bullying, we've seen political interference. Perhaps one of the clearest issues, I think, of real-world harm stemming from AI that we can identify today. One thing I think this presentation is also going to touch on, however, is there may actually be some opportunities as well for the growing power of AI technologies to help themselves solve some of the problems that deepfakes cause. We've heard this kind of hinted at in a couple of the sessions earlier today at the Fringe, but starting to explore some of those new techniques, things like watermarking, things like metadata analysis, classifiers, those types of AI tools that can help potentially be scaled up to help tackle the problem more systematically. So yes, joined by Benedict Dellot, Technology Policy Principal at Ofcom, to give a quick presentation on this. We'll be doing that for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have a short Q&A. And then we will break for the main sort of sessions and debates in the auditorium later. Thank you. Please join me in welcoming Benedict.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody. Lovely to be here. I'm Ben Dellot. I'm a principal in Ofcom, Ofcom's online safety team. Thanks very much for taking the time to join us for this session on deepfakes. So what are deepfakes? How are they covered by the Online Safety Act? Should we be worried about them? And to the extent we should be worried, what do we actually do about this type of content? These are the kind of questions that we've been looking at within Ofcom and which we are beginning to find answers to, which I want to share with you today. So before I get into those findings, it's worth reminding ourselves of the backdrop and context that led us to undertake this work. So what you see here is a sort of smattering of headlines commenting on apparent deepfake incidents that have occurred over the last year or so. So we've had, for example, the deepfake nude images of Taylor Swift that went viral on X and Telegram over the summer last year. We've also seen various concerning deepfakes in the political sphere. For example, a deepfake audio of Sadiq Khan, where he was falsely presented as criticising the Armistice Day parades. We've also seen deepfakes in the financial world, with a few incidents of workers in banks being duped into sending money to fraudsters. And there are many other incidents besides these, often going unreported. The reason why Ofcom takes an interest in this topic is because many of the harms that are being inflicted are those which the Online Safety Act seeks to address. If you're not familiar with the Act, it essentially creates new duties for online platforms, social media sites, dating apps, gaming platforms, any service that allows you to share content. And it requires these companies to take steps to address and remove illegal content and content that's harmful to children. The good news about the Act, and something which is often underappreciated, is that it captures and addresses many types of deepfake. If it's illegal to share a given piece of content, generally speaking, it doesn't matter if it's genuine or if it's synthetic and AI generated. Deepfake CSAM is still illegal CSAM under the law. Deepfake fraud content is still illegal fraud content. Deepfake content that is intended to bully others is still considered regulated content that's harmful to children, and so on. What that means is that social media platforms, video sharing platforms, etc., need to take steps to address that type of content, and I'll explain more about those requirements at the end. In terms of our work on this topic, Ofcom produced a report last year, a sort of big picture analysis of the overall landscape, which tried to understand from a bird's eye view, what are deepfakes? Are they becoming more common? What can we, in theory, do about them? And we set out maybe something like 12 to 15 solutions in a high level of detail. We've since followed that up with a second project that's looking more closely at one group of solutions that we call embedding measures. What that means is essentially attaching information to content, whether that's through watermarking or content metadata schemes or some other route. And we'll be publishing our findings from that work in the next couple of months. And after that, we'll be turning our attention to a second group of measures called detection measures. So that includes things like the use of machine learning classifiers to detect synthetic content. And I'll explain more about what I mean by those measures shortly. But first, what are deepfakes exactly? So every expert, every organisation has their own lens that they apply to this phenomenon. But broadly speaking, we would define deepfakes as AI-generated audio-visual content that misrepresents someone or something. So they're created by AI, not by hand, not manually. They're intended to cause harm. They misrepresent someone or something. And by the way, the bit there about something means that you can have deepfakes that don't necessarily feature any individual or person. They could be just environments. So you might, for example, have a fake image of a battlefield scene. And deepfakes are audiovisual content. We don't include text within our definition. So that's the headline. Some of you might have come across this term cheapfake, which describes less sophisticated methods of manipulating media. For example, you might slow down video footage, you might speed it up, you might change the caption. Very simple things that can distort the presentation of that content and give a different meaning to it. A really well-known example of a cheapfake was a video of Nancy Pelosi, which was doing the rounds a few years ago. And in that footage, it was slowed down to give the appearance that she was slurring her words. It's a sort of very basic technique, but a simple way of distorting impressions. A really important point we make in the paper that we published last year is that not all synthetic content is harmful. There are lots of uses of AI to create content that's funny, that's satirical, that may even be educational. I'm sure you've seen the image on the left. It's a fake image of the Pope in what's meant to be a Balenciaga jacket. On the right, these are images from a video where AI has been used to imagine what Harry Potter would look like if it was set in Berlin. And you can see many other examples of that. One of the things we tried to do in our paper was to really distill what's a fairly complex phenomenon into something that's easy to digest and to grasp. And to help us do that, we established a three-part typology of deepfakes, setting out what we felt were the three main ways that they can manifest and cause harm. So the first group of deepfakes that we identified are those that demean. So these are intended to discredit, to bully, to shame, to abuse, humiliate a victim by purposefully presenting them in a particular scenario, for example, taking part in sexual activity. They often feature women, and we've seen plenty of examples of high-profile individuals affected by this type of deepfake. Taylor Swift, I mentioned earlier, Kathy Newman, Giorgia Meloni in Italy. And the impact of demeaning deepfakes goes beyond just embarrassment. There was one study that found that they can cause, in the author's words, a social rupture, shifting a victim's sense of identity and warping their relations with other people. Our second category of deepfake are those that defraud. So the clue is in the title here. But these deepfakes are primarily used to assist fraudulent behaviour, such as scam communications, false advertising, but they can also be used to facilitate other activity, including grooming. A well-known example of a defrauding deepfake is the fake advert that featured Martin Lewis that was shared on Facebook not long ago, where he was appearing to be asking users to sign up for a non-existent Elon Musk investment. And there are lots of other examples of defrauding deepfakes besides that one. I think the key difference between the defrauding deepfakes and the demeaning deepfakes is that with the defrauding kind, bad actors are often not targeting a particular individual. The identity of the victim doesn't matter so much. What they want to do is target as many people as possible. And then you have deepfakes that disinform, and these are primarily aimed at shaping public opinion on political and social issues. So things like elections, healthcare, cultural topics. One example is the audio deepfake of a Slovakian politician, I think just released before polling day in Slovakia, and that falsely presented him as discussing how to rig that upcoming election. But you do have other types of disinforming deepfakes that aren't related to a particular event as such, like an election, but aim to foment disagreement on contentious subjects. So earlier last year, Microsoft published some research showing that Chinese actors had been sharing deepfakes in the US environment about politically divisive issues, so things like gun ownership, gun controls. So not event-related, just topic more more general topic related. So yeah, those are the three types of deepfakes in our typology that we're concerned with. But how common are they? Well, we have a few surveys, other sources of intelligence on this, which we collated in our first paper. Just to pull out a few facts, 276,149, the number of intimate image abuse deepfakes that were found by the campaign group My Image, My Choice on the top deepfake video sites in 2023. 10% is the proportion of UK children aged 13 to 16 who said they had directly experienced or knew of somebody who had the experience being featured in fake nude images or videos. And then 43%, the proportion of UK adults who said they'd encountered at least one deepfake in the last 6 months. But it has to be said it's really difficult to properly measure, to properly gauge the prevalence of deepfakes online. And one of the reasons is because, by definition, deepfakes are intended to deceive. So people often won't remember seeing one, even if it has influenced them, when they're asked, for example, in user surveys. So that is, I guess, the problem space, if you like. But what about the solution space? What can we actually do about deepfakes? In the paper, we outline 4 main levers or approaches for tackling this type of content. So the first of these is what we call prevention measures. These involve attempts to stop deepfakes from being created in the first place. And typically what you're trying to do here is intervene upstream in AI supply chains to limit what models can produce. So we're talking here about things that OpenAI, Anthropic, Meta AI, Mistral and others can do. So one example of that is filtering or blocking certain types of prompts from being entered into Gen AI models. Coming back to the Taylor Swift deepfakes incident, it turned out that some of those images were being created using Microsoft's image generator, so that Microsoft designer. And Microsoft responded to this problem by introducing tighter prompt blockers for its tool, so making it harder, or trying to make it harder for people to create images of celebrities like Taylor Swift. Another measure that model developers can take is to remove certain data from their training data sets that are used to train their models. So if you don't want your models to create deepfakes of high-profile politicians, you might choose to remove them from your images of those politicians from your training data sets, whether that's Keir Starmer or Sadiq Khan or Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. I'll come back shortly to some of the limitations of these approaches, but that is in a nutshell what prevention involves. The second major lever is the use of what we call embedding measures. So as I said, embedding involves marking content or attaching information to a piece of content about its provenance to try to indicate whether it's synthetic or genuine. All of you, I'm sure, will have heard of this phrase watermarking. It's one of the best known embedding measures. So this involves adding an imperceptible mark to content to try to signal its provenance. So if you think about images, one way of doing this would be to alter the placement of pixels in the image in a way which is imperceptible to you or I, to the naked eye, but which can be picked up by a watermark detection tool. So in theory, if OpenAI's image generators were used to imprint a watermark on an image, and that image is uploaded to, say, Instagram or TikTok, then the content moderators on those platforms should be able to tell if they have the watermark detection tool, whether it is AI, whether it's been AI generated, and then moderate it accordingly. Alongside watermarking, you also have what's called content metadata schemes, things like Adobe C2PA. They operate differently, but they serve a similar purpose. Then you have detection as a third lever. So this refers to techniques that can be used to identify deepfakes regardless of whether they've been inscribed with markings or had information attached to them. Sort of the holy grail of dealing with deepfakes, because it doesn't matter whether, as I said, you've got a watermark on it, whether it's been produced by OpenAI and proprietary models, or whether it's been produced by somebody using an open source model, which is like really one of the hardest nuts to crack. It shouldn't matter. You should be able to use detection tools to see whether it's been synthetically generated or manipulated. One means of detecting this type of content is through the use of machine learning classifiers. These will try to detect subtle patterns in content that might suggest it's real or otherwise. So, for example, for images and videos, the classifiers might be trained to detect the symmetry in someone's face, the subject's face, the presence of erroneous shadows and lighting, a lack of blinking, and so on. Lots of different ways you can do this in theory. And there are a fair few safety tech firms that now offer these kinds of products. Another really important means of detecting deepfakes is through user reporting and the power of the crowd. So although a lot of people won't be able to spot deepfakes, some people might be able to. And this, I think, is particularly useful when we're talking about celebrity deepfakes, where you've got passionate followers and supporters of that celebrity who want to make sure that they're not victims of this type of abuse, and who may be able better to tell whether the content is fake or otherwise. So yeah, that's a really important, I guess, tool in our armory, user reporting. And then lastly, you have the lever of enforcement. So this means model developers setting clear rules about how their their tools can be used and the content that can be produced. And also platforms being clear about the type of content they allow on their service. It also means, importantly, enforcing those rules. So taking down violative content that breaches terms and conditions, and then sanctioning users who don't follow those rules. And if you look at the terms of service of most model developers, most platforms, they nearly all include a prohibition on harmful deepfakes, even if they don't use that terminology. So yeah, those are the four main ways of addressing deepfakes: prevention, embedding, detection, and enforcement. As we say in the paper, though, while all of those approaches and the measures that sit underneath them have a lot of promise, they have a lot of merit, they also have weaknesses too. So if you think about prevention measures, like the prompt filters that I just talked about, one of the really challenging things about those is they might prevent the development and generation of innocuous content, benign content, as well as the harmful type of content. If you take something like watermarking, some of those forms appear to be quite brittle and easily removed through things like video compression, image video cropping, that type of thing. There have been some improvements in watermarking over the last year or so, but that's still an issue for some. So lastly, I just want to say a few words about what Ofcom expects of regulated platforms under the new terms of the Online Safety Act. So firstly, social media platforms and others will need to complete a risk assessment. So that includes assessing the risk of their users coming across certain types of deepfake content, like those intending to defraud people or those which constitute intimate image abuse. Secondly, regulated platforms will need to implement measures to combat these risks. So this can include some of the things that I've just run through, whether that's watermarking or the use of ML classifiers. But it can also include more generic measures, more generic content moderation efforts. So Ofcom's Codes of Practice sets some of these out. They contain a bunch of measures, recommended measures like having well-resourced content moderation teams, having easy-to-use reporting functions, having a named person accountable in the organisation for online safety compliance. These are all things that aren't specifically targeted at deepfakes, but they can help to address this type of content as they could other types of harmful content. And then thirdly, some forms of regulated platforms will also need to take down priority illegal content where they become aware of it. So for example, if you're a video sharing platform and you become alerted to a non-consensual sexual deepfake video, so for example, some of the Taylor Swift content that we've talked about, you become aware of that, you need to take it down and take it down swiftly. If you're a dating app and you become alerted to a deepfake profile that's being used to commit a fraud offence, you need to take that down, and so on. I should say that there are several other duties besides these ones, but I think those are the headline ones to be aware of. And what we're trying to just get across when we go out and talk about deepfakes is, some of this content is actually regulated. There's an impression often that this is a bit of a Wild West, that people can just share this content, that there's a massive regulatory gap here. And that's not the case. There's definitely issues, which the government and DSIC can talk more to than I can, but much of this type of content is actually dealt with by the Online Safety Act. So yeah, that's really what I wanted to run through today. Very happy to answer any questions you might have, and yeah, feel free to email me as well if we run out of time. Thank you. Question at the back.
Thank you. Sorry, just a quick one. I just wanted to ask, how concerned are you about open source models and like whether they're implementing some of the measures that you spoke about?
Yeah, it is a big concern, open source models, because you could be an open source model developer and you could implement certain safeguards, filters, watermarks, but based on our research and the work that we've done, those can be quite easily removed. And it doesn't take much to fine-tune open source models to create something that is capable of producing deepfake pornography. It's an issue. So when we think about the ways that we try to address deepfakes, this is one of the reasons why we try not to focus too heavily or exclusively on model developers. So, for example, in that case, we'd be interested in what platforms that host models can do, whether that's GitHub or Hugging Face. They have, I guess, more sight on how models are being used, the actors that are using them, and although the Online Safety Act, has limits, we'd be talking to those kind of platforms and seeing what they can do to help address this type of issue. But yeah, open source is definitely a concern. Yeah, over here, and then over here.
Obviously, Photoshop's been around for a while, and it seems like novelly deepfake images aren't that scary. But obviously, lots of people are very concerned about deepfake video. I just wonder if you have any idea of like the energy and like hardware maybe costs of like actual deepfake video done well. Because I wonder like how realistic is it going to be that there'll be like every teenager in schools over the world will be able to do this versus a more limited number of people with existing like infrastructure and energy like resources able to do something like video deepfake generation?
Yeah, so not an expert by any means in things like resource use from models, but I think what we've seen through things like the release of DeepSeek's model, I know that's only an LLM, but you have DeepSeek releasing video generators as well. I think the cost of running those, both training them and running them, is just decreasing. So I don't personally see that as an impediment to the creation of deepfakes, to be honest. If it is, it may be that it erodes pretty quickly over the next few years. And then, yeah.
Thank you. One of the methods you mentioned is relying on the capacity of users to detect and then report if they see a deepfake, but that relies on them being able to detect and recognize that this is a deepfake video. Have you seen any works around educating and helping users to be able to differentiate between a deepfake video and a realistic one?
Yeah. So I think the bad news is, not to be too depressing, but the evidence that I've seen is that it doesn't make a huge amount of difference to the education. But I think it's probably early days for this. And we're starting to see, there's different ways of approaching this. You could say, okay, we're going to bring this to schools and make sure that kids are aware of the possibility that this type of content is out there, which I think is a great thing. Then there's a sort of another step, which is, okay, we're going to try to help people determine what is synthetic and what's not. I think that's really challenging. Then you've got the approach, which is, well, let's have platforms label content when they become aware of it, and then the users can look at a label and make a judgment about how seriously they want to take that content. So I think you've got strengths and limitations and pros and cons to all of those approaches. To take the example of labels, everyone thinks this is a really good thing. And we really do want to investigate this and look at the evidence for its efficacy. One of the concerns we have, though, is that it may ultimately... So number one, a lot of content will be manipulated by AI in future. like whenever we take photos, for example, often we're adding filters or some kind of layer of manipulation to them. Does that mean we have to label that content as synthetic or not? That's challenge number one. I think challenge number two is that we don't know yet whether seeing a label immediately means that people will think that it's of lower grade quality. And so if you're a creator, if you're an influencer, if you're someone who's an artist and you're using this technology, do you want that kind of label to be on your content? So one of the things that we have to take really seriously in Ofcom is just the unintended consequences of these types of interventions. There's no silver bullet to this type of issue. I think what we need to do is just do as much research as possible, weigh up the pros and cons, and share that and get that out there. And hopefully, do keep a lookout for the 2 papers we'll be publishing this year on that topic. Natalia.
Thanks for a great presentation. Really, really informative. I have a question on global examples. Are there any? Because I think with what's currently going on with the content moderation being sort of eliminated, let's say, on some of the major platforms, and things like changing platforms. So if, let's say, Meta doesn't allow you to post your deepfake content, you can always find another platform that will. And I wonder, you're obviously based in the UK, but are there any global examples that you see that are addressing those issues well, or is it mostly UK, Europe? What's your take on the global approaches?
It's a tricky one. I mean, what I think we're seeing with attempts to address deepfakes is just a bit of a smattering of experiments, some of which are working well and some less well. Meta, for example, was one of the first to move into labeling. YouTube are doing some work in that space as well. But then you can see that some of those platforms, understandably, in many cases, are kind of tweaking their approaches and adjusting them constantly. So Meta with its labels, they changed those partly for the reasons that I just mentioned, which is that creators are worried about users seeing the label and sort of that diminishing their sense of the quality of that content. So it's a real, I think we're just in a period of full experimentation, and what we want to see is just as much as possible evidence of efficacy and what's working and what's not, and let's take account of these unintended consequences. Maybe a question there.
Hi, thanks so much for a great presentation. Curious a little bit on some of the actors behind some of this content, the difference between, have you found there to be a material difference in, let's say, larger coordinated actors, so maybe states or even larger organizations that are doing this maybe with different intentions in mind as opposed to sort of the more individual single actors? Is there kind of a material difference in how you think about deepfakes in that context and how you might approach the regulation of them?
Yeah, so I think first of all, you just get a real mix of different actors here. I mean, one of the things about the developments in generative AI is that the threshold of expertise to be able to create highly convincing content is just drastically reduced. So maybe 5 years ago, I think when we were talking about deepfakes, most people were saying, well, it's state actors who have the resources to put the effort into creating a convincing deepfake of a politician. And then pushing that out there. Today, we have situations where school children can download apps and create nude images of their classmates, and they're creating CSAM and they're not even aware of it. So we have to be open to all of those different actors, and that's something that's changed quite drastically in the last 5 years. I think what we're seeing, and this is why the typology is quite useful, is you're probably seeing more state actors involved in the disinforming deepfake sharing, sophisticated actors of all kinds involved in the defrauding deepfakes, anyone who wants to try and make money and who has loose morals. And then in the demeaning deepfakes, unfortunately, that's the kind of thing we're seeing lots of people get involved in, people who bear grudges, people who don't really know what they're, like young children, for example, really not knowing what they're doing and just messing around with these tools, something they will regret later in life, getting involved in that as well. So I think, yeah, the actor space has really shifted. And what that means is that the prevention measures that we use have to shift as well. So, you know, coming back to the education point, you know, we have to make sure that kids are aware not just of the likelihood that they could be victims of this type of content and that they might be duped when they go onto social media platforms, but also making sure that they don't try these things out and experiment with them. So yeah, we have to really think quite laterally when we're thinking about interventions now. Over here.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. So the UK government recently announced that it was going to create a new criminal offence to tackle individuals that are tweaking AI tools to create deepfakes that are intended for intimate image abuse. But the legislation doesn't really regulate over platforms, and it doesn't ban notifying apps like you mentioned. So how is Ofcom able to work on prevention? Like you showed there that there's prevention, detection. Is Ofcom able to work on prevention rather than enforcement without any additional legislation, or does it need more tools to do that within with platforms, alongside platforms?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So fundamentally, the Online Safety Act, in a nutshell, covers, I guess it's focused on downstream players. So any service that enables you to share content, you know, whether that's social media platform or a gaming service or a chat forum, that's captured. Search engines are captured. And then there's a part of the Act that deals with providers of pornographic content. We don't intervene, we don't have the powers to intervene upstream, but I think what we have to do as a sort of modern, sensible regulator is think about how we use our hard levers as well as our soft levers. So the hard levers are, okay, we have these powers, we enforce them to the extent we can on regulated services. The soft levers are, we put papers out, we put research out, we do talks like this, we have conversations with these companies upstream, and we share what we think good practice looks like. So that's sort of what we try to do. In terms of that particular offence that the government's bringing in, I wouldn't want to talk for them, but I'd just say that it's great that we're starting to see proposers of legislative changes to address some of these apparent regulatory gaps. So I think the one you might be referencing there is a proposed offence relating to outlawing the use and creation of CSAM models capable of creating CSAM, which I think is like a really, really good move. I guess the sort of thing that, again, like coming back to unintended consequences, is one of the things that we just want to make sure is that you might have models that are capable of creating all manner of content. Those model developers might have no idea that their model could be capable of creating CSAM. It might be fine-tuned to do that. So these are kind of things that, I guess the government is thinking through at the moment. But yeah, it's a really complicated space. We can do a lot formally. We try and do a lot besides that informally. And then we're always talking to government about the merits of some of the things that they're putting forward. Over the back here.
Thank you. The third category that you mentioned, the one where the deepfakes influence public opinion, feels like a deepfake like that could be out there for a while before someone realizes that it's out there, and it could have already shifted public opinion. Have you seen any potential remedial action for that? It feels like it could have a profound societal impact. So I actually think that with those, I mean, I can go back to it actually. So deepfakes are disinform. I actually feel in many cases that the potency of an impact of that type of deepfake can diminish over time. I think the one that doesn't diminish over time would be the demeaning deepfakes.
if I've just told you about the Sadiq Khan audio deepfake, if you heard that, you immediately know that wasn't true. But something like a demeaning sexual deepfake just lives on in its potency. But anyway, that's just a sort of, these are just hypotheses. I might be wrong about that. But interestingly, with the disinforming deepfakes type, we all expected this, or last year, the year of elections, to be one that an AI video or an AI image would be particularly disruptive. And I don't think we actually saw that, which is a good thing. Maybe because we were on much more high alert for this type of content. It doesn't, it might be that to this gentleman's point before about video generators, it might be that changes in the future as this content becomes more sophisticated. But yeah, we are, we're concerned about all of this, but the impact of these deepfakes, I think, varies over time, and some of them diminish and some of them live on. I think we might be out of time, but thank you very much for taking time to join us. And as I said, follow up with me on email afterwards, add me on LinkedIn if you wish, and I hope that was useful.